voice shaky. My name is Mary, and ever since I was a little girl, I had dreamt of a beautiful wedding, one filled with laughter, joy, and most importantly, love. I used to sketch wedding gowns in my notebooks, doodling away while imagining my perfect day. The church would be filled with the aroma of fresh flowers, and the pews adorned with our closest friends and family. But dreams and reality seldom align. The day I married Jack, the atmosphere was tense, not jubilant. The church was as grand as I had imagined, with tall, stained glass windows that filtered in heavenly light. The problem wasn't the setting, it was the man standing at the altar. "Are you okay?" I asked, grasping his hands as I reached him. Our eyes met, but only briefly. His gaze fell to the floor. "Yeah, I'm fine. Nervous. That's all," Jack mumbled, avoiding eye contact. His lips barely moved, as if the words were too heavy for him to carry. The priest started the ceremony, reciting verses about love, commitment, and a shared life. My mother sat in the front pew, tissues in hand, already emotional. I searched for some flicker of happiness in Jack's eyes, but found none. "Do you take Mary to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the priest asked. Jack hesitated for a moment that felt like an eternity. "I do," he finally said, but his words lacked conviction. "And do you, Mary, take Jack to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was my moment, my commitment. "I do," I replied, trying to infuse my words with enough love for both of us. The tension in the room was palpable. Even the "you may kiss the bride" moment felt forced. Our lips met, but there was no passion, only a perfunctory sealing of our vows. We turned to face our attendees, and I forced a smile. Mom was clapping, teary-eyed. She wanted to believe in us, even if I had my doubts. After the ceremony, the photographer tried to capture candid moments, instructing us to look at each other lovingly. "Come on, smile like you mean it," he chided, looking at Jack. Jack gave a half-hearted smile, as if physically struggling to show happiness. We posed for the pictures but failed to capture the essence of a genuinely happy newlywed couple. As we headed to the reception, I pulled him aside, away from prying eyes. "Jack, we're married now. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." "It's nothing," he said, looking away. "Let's not ruin the day." I sighed. My dream wedding had turned into a theater of smiles, a presentation for the world hiding an unsettling reality. The day was supposed to be the first chapter of our happily ever after, but as I looked into Jack's distant eyes, I knew our story was starting on an uncertain note. Months after the wedding, life settled into a familiar yet uncomfortable routine. Jack went to work, came home, and mostly kept to himself. We exchanged pleasantries, but our conversations never went beyond the day's mundane details. What's for dinner? How was work? And so on. My mother, Linda, sensed the tension, but attributed it to newlywed growing pains. "Every marriage has its teething problems," she reassured me one evening as we drank tea in the kitchen. "It'll get better." "I hope so, Mom," I sighed, staring into my cup as if it might offer some answers. Then, something changed. A delay in my menstrual cycle, nausea, and sudden mood swings clued me in. I decided to take a home pregnancy test, heart pounding as I awaited the results. The 2 pink lines appeared. I was pregnant. You'd think this news would be a turning point, a joyous occasion to reignite the spark in our marriage. Instead, apprehension filled me. I practiced how to break the news to Jack, imagining different scenarios in my head. Finally, one evening, as we sat in the living room after dinner, I took a deep breath. "Jack, I have something to tell you," I began, my voice shaky. "I'm pregnant." He looked up from his book, his eyes locking onto mine for the first time in what felt like forever. Why would I joke about something like this? The disappointment in his reaction was a slap in the face. I expected, at the very least, a smile, a hug, or even a look of wonder at the thought of us becoming parents. I got none. He sighed deeply, setting his book down. "All right, I guess we'll figure it out." Figure it out. This isn't a problem to be solved, Jack. "This is our child," I retorted, unable to hide the hurt in my voice. "Let's not make this a big deal right now. We've got time to think things through," he said dismissively, picking his book back up as if this life-altering news was a mere inconvenience. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart. This should have been a celebration of our growing family, but instead it felt like an invisible wall had grown between us. If he was this apathetic about a child, what did that say about our future? The atmosphere in the house grew colder after that. We avoided discussing the pregnancy like an unspoken secret that hung in the air, tainting everything. My mom noticed my glum demeanor, but thought it best not to intervene yet. "What's meant to be will find a way," she said, trying to offer comfort. I wanted to believe her that somehow our lives would magically align and form a happy family portrait, but with each passing day, that vision grew more and more distorted. Jack became increasingly distant, and his irritability began to manifest in small yet significant ways. Curt responses, avoidance, and an overall detachment from our relationship. It was as if the news of the pregnancy pulled the last thread unraveling our already fragile marriage. I was left contemplating the life growing inside me and the dying connection with the man who had promised to be my lifelong partner. How did we get here? And where would we go from this point on? The questions loomed large, filling me with a sense of foreboding for what lay ahead. Life has a way of compounding complications when you least expect it. The tension between Jack and me was like a fog that refused to lift, hanging over every interaction and moment we shared. My pregnancy progressed, bringing with it a mix of anticipation and dread. I'd always thought that the birth of a child would be a sacred bond between a couple, but for us, it seemed to act as a catalyst for disarray. It was a Thursday afternoon, the autumn leaves swirling in the wind outside, when my mother approached me with a look of deep concern etched across her face. "Marie," she said, her voice tinged with urgency, "can you come with me for a second?" Confused, I followed her into the kitchen. She opened one of the upper cupboards and reached into the back, pulling out a small Ziploc bag filled with a white, powdery substance. "I found this hidden behind the cereal boxes," she said, her hand trembling as she held the bag. "I can tell you now, it's not baking soda or anything like that." I stared at the bag, my heart pounding. This was a level of deceit I hadn't considered, even in my worst suspicions about Jack. "Mom, are you sure it's not yours? Could it be something innocent?" I questioned, even though I knew how ludicrous the suggestion was. "Mary, you know me. I've never touched drugs in my life, and even if I had, I wouldn't hide them behind the cornflakes. Okay, let's say they are drugs. What should we do?" "I think you need to talk to Jack. This isn't something we can just ignore." I wanted to confront Jack right away, but the gravity of the situation paralyzed me. What would I even say? And how would he react? I didn't get to ponder those questions for too long because just as I was considering my next steps, a sharp pain cut across my abdomen. My water broke right there in the middle of our kitchen. "Oh my God, Mom, the baby's coming," I gasped, clutching my belly. "All right, let's get you to the hospital. We'll deal with everything else later," Mom said, her immediate concern switching from the ominous Ziploc bag to the impending arrival of her grandchild. As I was being loaded into the ambulance, contractions intensifying, I looked back at my home. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where I could feel safe and loved, but at that moment, it felt like a ticking time bomb of secrets and betrayals. My thoughts swirled, torn between the excitement of meeting my baby and the dread of confronting the crumbling life I had built with Jack. Amidst the pain and the urgency, the bag of white powder my mother had found floated back into my thoughts. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a dark undercurrent flowing beneath the rushing tides of childbirth. I couldn't shake off the gut, feeling that whatever was in that bag would irreversibly alter the course of our lives. The very man I had vowed to share my life with might be harboring secrets that could not only ruin our relationship, but put us both at risk in ways I couldn't yet fully grasp. That's when I realized I was not just bringing new life into the world. I was also on the cusp of discovering hidden layers of the life I was already living. The birth of my child felt like a moment of reckoning, a doorway into an uncertain future, a future that had just become a whole lot more complicated. The childbirth was a blur of pain, hope, and medical jargon. When I held my baby, Emma, in my arms for the first time, a sense of love so overpowering washed over me. She was perfect, a beautiful little creature who looked up at me with eyes that held the universe. For a brief moment, I forgot about the issues at home, the bag of drugs, and the growing chasm between Jack and me. I was a mother, and that feeling was incomparable. But reality has a cruel way of snapping you back. When we returned home a few days later, the atmosphere was palpably hostile. Jack was there, pacing the living room as I walked in, baby in arms. "Where's Mom?" I asked, looking around, noticing the absence of her usually welcoming presence. "I kicked her out," Jack answered, his tone more aggressive than I had ever heard before. "You what?" The words escaped my mouth before I could stop them. "She's too intrusive, always sticking her nose where it doesn't belong," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I can't believe you do that, especially now. I need her." "Emma needs her," I countered, my voice tinged with disbelief and a simmering anger. "Mary, this is between you and me. We don't need outside interference," Jack replied, raising his voice now. I glanced down at Emma, her tiny face crinkled, as if she could sense the tension. "You've got a lot of nerve, Jack. You throw my mother out of her own home and call that outside interference." Before Jack could retort, the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, Emma cradled in one arm. 2 police officers stood at the entrance. "Mrs. Mary Johnson?" one of them asked, checking a piece of paper. "Yes, that's me," I said, puzzled. "We got an anonymous tip about drug possession at this address. Mind if we come in and have a look?" I hesitated, looking back at Jack, whose face had turned a shade paler. Then it clicked. He had called the cops, probably thinking he could pin the drug possession on me or my mother. A risky move, but it was the final straw. "Sure, officers, please come in," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. "If you check the upper kitchen cabinet behind the cereal boxes, you might find what you're looking for." They followed my direction and found the bag exactly where it had been. The officer pulled it out and looked at Jack. "Is this yours, sir?" Jack stammered, lost for words. They handcuffed him and read him his rights as I stood there, Emma in my arms, watching the man I had married for love being taken away for something he had probably planned to pin on me. As they escorted him out of the house, one of the officers turned to me. "Ma'am, you might want to get a lawyer involved. This could turn into a complicated legal case." "Thank you, officer, I will," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. When the door closed behind them, the gravity of everything that had happened started to sink in. My husband was being arrested, my mother was gone, and here I was, a new mother without the support system I so desperately needed. But amidst the chaos, I also felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Whatever love story I thought we had was a mere illusion, and now, with the hard truths laid bare, I could finally start planning a future. A real future, for Emma and me. The house was quiet, unsettlingly so, but the silence gave me clarity. No longer was I bound to the illusion of a happy marriage, or the false promises of a man who was clearly not who he claimed to be. As I sat down holding Emma closer than ever, I knew this was not the end, but a new beginning. A start of a life where I was not just a wife or a daughter, but a mother, ready to protect her child from whatever storms lay ahead. And at that moment, despite the loneliness, I realized that I was not alone. I had Emma, and together we would face the world, come what may. Life has a way of thrusting you into the legal system when you least expect it. A week had passed since Jack's arrest, and every day had been a roller coaster of lawyer consultations, police statements, and endless paperwork. My mother had returned home, shaken but supportive, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and regret. "Mary, I never liked him. But I never thought he'd go this far, she admitted as we sat in the living room, Emma napping in her crib beside us. I know, Mom. I wish I'd listened to you, I said, my eyes fixed on the legal documents sprawled on the coffee table. There was a pause filled with the weight of unspoken words and missed opportunities before my mother finally spoke. What's the next step? Divorce, for sure. And I'm pressing charges for illegal drug possession. The lawyer said we have a strong case. The trial day arrived sooner than I had anticipated. I sat in the courtroom, Emma in my mother's arms, a sea of unknown faces around us. Jack was there too, handcuffed, wearing an expression of a man who had lost everything yet still struggled to maintain a facade of indifference. Mrs. Johnson, you claim that you had no knowledge of the drugs found in your home, the prosecutor asked as I took the stand. Absolutely, I responded, clutching the edge of the witness box. Can anyone corroborate this? My mother can. She was the one who discovered them. Besides, the police were called to my house by an anonymous tip suggesting drug possession. My husband thought he could frame me or my mother, but it backfired. The room was silent, the gravity of my words hanging in the air. Jack's lawyer rose, adjusting his tie as he prepared to cross. Examine me. Mrs. Johnson, isn't it true that your marriage was strained? That this could be an elaborate way to get back at my client? Are you suggesting that I planted the drugs? I shot back, disbelief coloring my tone. I'm merely pointing out that people do desperate things in desperate times. If I were desperate, it was because I was living with a man who was a ticking time bomb. But to plant drugs and jeopardize the safety of my newborn and my mother? No. I'm many things, but I'm not a criminal. The trial went on. Witnesses were called, and evidence was presented. When the verdict was finally read, it felt like an eternity had passed. Guilty. The word echoed in the courtroom, stripping away the last remnants of Jack's bravado. As the judge announced that Jack would be sentenced to 5 years in prison for drug possession, I felt an array of emotions flood over me. Relief, anger, but most of all, liberation. I looked at Emma peacefully asleep in my mother's arms, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world she had entered. She would grow up without her biological father, but she would be better off without the poisonous atmosphere he brought into our lives. Mary, it's over, my mother whispered, squeezing my hand, her voice tinged with the wisdom of years and the wounds of experience. Yes, Mom, it's over, I echoed, realizing that sometimes, to protect the ones we love, we have to turn the tables, no matter how painful it might be. As I walked out of the courtroom, Emma cradled in my arms, I didn't see a defeated woman in the mirror. I saw a survivor, a mother, a daughter, and a woman ready to rebuild her life from the ground up. And that was the sweetest revenge life could offer. Weeks had passed since the verdict, but the lingering effects of that day continued to fill the air in our home. Newspapers had sensationalized our story, branding it a suburban tragedy. But amidst the turmoil, life had to move on. I had officially filed for divorce, and with Jack in prison, the process was straightforward. One evening, as my mother was setting the table for dinner, I received a phone call. It was Lisa, my attorney. Mary, we've got news, she said, her tone revealing nothing. Is everything okay? I asked, my heart beating a little faster than normal. Yes. The divorce has been finalized, and given Jack's criminal record, you've been granted full custody of Emma. Also, the judge has ordered a portion of Jack's assets to be seized as restitution. I let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Lisa. This means the world to me. I'm glad I could help, Mary. You and Emma deserve a fresh start. After hanging up, I turned to my mother. It's done. The divorce is final and we've got full custody of Emma. My mother came over and hugged me. Justice is served, then. Yes, but it's not just about justice, Mom. It's also about freedom. Freedom from fear, from a toxic relationship, and from a life that could have ruined Emma. That child is lucky to have you, my mother said, wiping away a tear. As we sat down for dinner, Emma cooing in her high chair, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the adversities that had shaped me. It's a strange thing to be thankful for. But those trials had led me to this point, a point where I could fully appreciate the love and tranquility that filled our home now. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life settled into a new normal. I had taken a job as an editor for a local magazine, working from home to spend time with Emma. My mother, too, found a sense of peace, enrolling in art classes she had always dreamt of but never had the time for. One day, as I was sifting through the mail, I found an envelope with the prison's return address. It was a letter from Jack. Mary, I had a lot of time to think. I won't say that I've changed, but I've realized the magnitude of my mistakes. The life I envisioned for us was a lie, a house of cards that I foolishly believed would stand strong. I'm sorry for the hurt I've caused. Goodbye. I read the letter multiple times, each word sinking in. For a moment, I pondered on the man I had married, the promises he had made, and the life he had destroyed. The apology was far too late and could never undo the harm, but it brought closure. A closure I didn't even realize I needed until that moment. "Who's it from?" my mother asked, noticing the somber expression on my face. "It's from Jack. He's apologizing," I said, folding the letter and tucking it away in a drawer. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know if it matters. Whether he's genuinely sorry or not, it's a chapter in our lives that's closed now." That night, as I put Emma to bed, I thought about the story I would tell her one day. A story not of victimhood, but of resilience, not of defeat, but of triumph. And as I switched off the light, the room dimming around us, I knew that this was our fresh start, a new chapter in a book that was far from finished. Justice had been served, not just through courts and legal battles, but through reclaiming our lives and our right to happiness. And as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I was finally home, in every sense.